The soft rustle of my silk gown felt almost unreal against my skin, the delicate threads gliding over my arms as I adjusted the straps in the mirror. Outside, the sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the floral arrangements in the hall, every petal seemingly perfect, every ribbon in place. My phone buzzed against my clutch, a tiny reminder that life wasn't always this carefully orchestrated. "Emma, your parents are here," my wedding planner said gently, and suddenly my chest tightened. My parents, smiling but with an edge in their eyes, approached, hands clasped as if holding back something important. And then they said it. "We counted the gift money. It's enough to save your sister." My mother's voice was calm, almost casual, but the words hit like a slap I wasn't ready for. I smiled, carefully masking the storm inside. Pride, hurt, disbelief, and that familiar protective surge for my sister all collided. How had it come to this? That my wedding day, the one I'd imagined as purely mine, had become the stage for old debts and unspoken expectations. I let my gaze drift to the city skyline outside the window, the wind tousling my hair through the open balcony. I felt the weight of years compressed into a single sentence, a lifetime of sacrifices condensed into money counted and handed over with a polite smile. My heart whispered questions I couldn't yet answer. Was this generosity, obligation, or a reminder of everything I had endured to get here? I tucked the trembling of my hands behind my back, inhaled the scent of fresh roses, and promised myself, this day would not break me. Not now, not ever. I remember the first night it all began to feel impossible. I was 19, fresh out of college, brimming with plans for my future, when I got the call from my mother. My younger sister, Lily, had been rushed to the hospital. A rare heart condition, the doctors said, and the bills, they were astronomical. I rushed home to our modest house in Chicago, my heart hammering in my chest. Mom was pacing, Dad silent, his forehead creased with worry. "Emma," my mother said, her voice strained, we don't have enough. We counted the savings, but it's not." Her words faltered, and I could see the weight of unspoken guilt hanging between us. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand that someone fix this, but all I could do was clutch her hands and feel the trembling in both of us. My dreams of moving to New York, of studying further, of carving out a life of my own, it all felt like a luxury I couldn't afford while my sister's life depended on me. That night, Grandma Rose sat beside me, her hands worn and warm. She didn't try to fix anything. She just looked me in the eyes and said, "You have the strength, Emma. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But remember, you don't have to do this alone." She pressed a small leather-bound notebook into my hands. "Plans, lists, dreams. Keep them safe. One day, they'll guide you." The next few weeks were a blur. I juggled hospital visits, part-time jobs, and late-night research on treatments and loans. I faced rejection, bureaucracy, and exhaustion that made my bones ache. Every time my parents looked at me with that mix of expectation and helplessness, I felt a spark ignite inside me, a determination not to fail Lily, not to surrender to circumstance. I made a decision that night, sitting alone in the hospital waiting room, the hum of fluorescent lights above me. I would take control. I would find a way to save my sister. And in doing so, I would claim my own life too. The notebook Grandma gave me became my blueprint, a silent witness to every plan, every setback, every small victory. It was my compass when the world seemed determined to push me off course. And in that moment, I knew something fundamental. This was the first time I truly understood what it meant to fight for love, for family, and for myself. After Lily's surgery, I knew I had to create a life that wasn't tethered to anyone else's expectations. I packed my essentials and moved to New York, carrying nothing but a suitcase, Grandma Rose's notebook, and a stubborn belief that I could make a difference. My first apartment was tiny, a studio in Queens with peeling paint and a window that barely opened, but it was mine. I could breathe, plan, and work without feeling judged at every turn. I found a mentor, Olivia Morgan, a seasoned businesswoman running a small but successful design consultancy. She had sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, but the moment she heard my story, She nodded like she'd been waiting for someone exactly like me. "You've got fire," she said on my first day, "but fire needs direction, or it burns everything down. Let's channel it." Under her guidance, I learned the nuances of negotiation, client management, and brand building. Every evening I returned to my apartment exhausted, my fingers stained with ink and my brain buzzing with ideas, yet I felt alive in a way I hadn't before. There were nights when I doubted myself, when the loneliness pressed against the walls, when calls from my parents asking about money made me want to throw in the towel. But I reminded myself why I was doing this. Every small win, landing my first client, designing my first project that actually turned a profit, watching Lily's health improve, was proof that I was moving forward. I kept my successes quiet from my family. Social media showed modest updates, a photo of coffee in hand, a new sketch, a thank you note to a client. They didn't know I was slowly building an empire, that every late night, every sacrifice, every tear shed alone in my apartment was constructing a future where I could protect my sister and honor my own dreams. And in those quiet moments, I often turned to Grandma Rose's notebook. The pages were filled with reminders of resilience. "Plan, but don't fear," she'd written. "Keep your heart soft, your mind sharp." It became my map, a secret roadmap to the life I was carving out. By the time I was ready to return home for my wedding, I was no longer the unsure 19-year-old who had left Chicago. I had grown into a confident, self-sufficient woman with a thriving business, a secure financial foundation, and a determination that no one could shake. And yet, I hadn't forgotten the family, the sister, or the sacrifices that had set me on this path. The wedding hall was alive with music and laughter, crystal chandeliers reflecting soft golden light across the polished floors. Everything was perfect, or at least, that's what it seemed to anyone glancing at the surface. I walked down the aisle, my heels clicking softly against the marble, every eye on me, every smile and whispered compliment a reminder of the life I had built in secret. When my parents approached, their hands trembling slightly, I felt the familiar tension coil in my chest. They had expected a nervous, overworked girl who had sacrificed everything for her sister and still hadn't made it. What they didn't know was that I had already won. My gaze swept the room, taking in the subtle markers of my success. My wedding planner was a client from my consultancy. The floral arrangements were sourced from a vendor I had mentored. Even the table settings reflected designs I had personally overseen. Every detail was a quiet testament to the life I had built, one that I had not shared with them. "Emma," my mother started, her voice hesitant. My father's jaw tightened, eyes darting as if trying to read my expression. They were bracing for struggle, for tears, for excuses. "I know what you're thinking," I said calmly, letting the words hang in the air. "You think I've been struggling, that every penny counted, every sleepless night spent worrying about the bills, and you feel responsible." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "But the truth is I've been building. Quietly. Purposefully. For Lily, yes, but also for myself." I gestured subtly toward the corner of the hall where a sleek display showcased my company's latest achievements, client awards, photographs of projects in the city skyline, press clippings. "This is mine. Every client, every project, every late night, you didn't see any of it because I was learning to stand on my own. And I did. I saved Lily, yes. And I created a life I am proud of." Their reactions were instantaneous. My mother's lips parted, eyes widening in shock. My father's face went pale, a mix of disbelief and shame flickering across his features. I could almost see the gears turning in their minds, recalculating all the assumptions they had made about me, about my future. I let the silence linger, watching as the truth sank in. The little girl who had once trembled at hospital corridors was now a woman who commanded her world, who had turned desperation into strategy, fear into achievement. And for the first time, they were seeing me, not the child who needed guidance, not the daughter who had to sacrifice everything, but the woman I had become. After the initial shock wore off, the room seemed to shrink around us, the chatter fading into a hum. I could see the realization settling in my parents' eyes. I was no longer the girl they could guide, the daughter whose life revolved entirely around their decisions. The tables had turned, and for the first time, I held the power to shape not just my own life, but the future of my family. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of years of sacrifice and struggle anchor me. "I'm happy to help," I said, my voice calm but firm, "but things can't go back to how they were. Lily's health is priority number one, and I will not allow old patterns to compromise that again." I laid out my conditions clearly, each one tethered to responsibility, growth, and mutual respect. My parents were to educate themselves about Lily's ongoing needs, to learn about her care rather than leaving it all to me. They needed to confront their past mistakes, acknowledge where they failed, and actively work to improve, not just for Lily, but for themselves. "I will support you financially," I continued, "but only if you commit to accountability. No excuses, no emotional manipulation, no reverting to habits that caused pain. You will show effort, understanding, and growth." I watched as the tension in their shoulders eased slightly, hope mingling with guilt in their expressions. I didn't stop there. My younger brother, who had always leaned on others without taking initiative, would start a small scholarship fund through my consultancy, contributing his time and effort rather than relying solely on family handouts. And Lily, she deserved the freedom to thrive without feeling like a burden, so her care plan would include professional guidance, with clear boundaries and responsibilities for everyone involved. Throughout the conversation, I maintained warmth, even as I held my ground. Compassion and authority can coexist, I reminded myself, and this was the moment to teach them that lesson. I wasn't punishing them. I was redirecting their energy, guiding them toward change, and ensuring that our future together wouldn't be defined by fear or debt. By the time I finished, there was a quiet shift in the room. My parents' heads bowed slightly, a mixture of remorse and understanding in their eyes. I had set the rules, but the gift wasn't the money. It was the framework for our family to heal, to grow, and to finally function as a team, bound not by obligation but by respect and love. For the first time, I felt the full measure of my own power. Not arrogance, not revenge, but a steady, unwavering sense of control over the life I had built and the family I loved. Weeks after the wedding, the changes I had set in motion began to take root. My parents enrolled in courses to better understand Lily's condition and how to support her independently. They started attending therapy sessions together, learning to communicate without guilt or blame. My brother, once passive and distracted, poured energy into the scholarship fund, mentoring young students while discovering a sense of responsibility he had never known. And Lily, she thrived. Free from the weight of being a burden, she smiled more, laughed more, and began to dream again. Watching her regain her confidence filled me with a quiet pride that no amount of money or recognition could ever replicate. Every night, I would glance at Grandma Rose's leather-bound notebook, now frayed at the edges from years of use. The words she had written, "Keep your heart soft, your mind sharp," had guided me here, and they now served as a reminder of how far I had come. I sat one evening in my apartment, the city skyline glittering through the window, and reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, they had all shaped me into the woman I was meant to become. A woman who could love fiercely, lead decisively, and forgive wisely. For the first time, I understood that strength wasn't about domination or control. It was about creating space for growth, for healing, and for love to flourish without conditions. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet triumph of a life reclaimed, a family rebuilt, and a sister saved. As I opened my eyes, the notebook rested on the table, a silent witness to every chapter of my life. I smiled softly, knowing that the story it held was only partially written. And with unwavering clarity, I whispered to myself, "I am the author of my life, and no one else holds the pen."